Hi everyone, and greetings from Germany. In this no-budget video, I'm going to show you how to connect your Pod Go using the 4-cable method to your beloved tube amplifier, and talk about why you might want to do that. The amp that I'm going to use for this video is a Lionheart 20 watt Class A 2-channel tube amplifier. It's a beautiful amp. It's a little bit heavy because of the fact that it's Class A. It's 20 watts but 15 kilos. Of course, not counting the cab. And it definitely needs some effects. It has a built-in reverb. It has 2 channels. Of course, you can see that you have you can control the gain on the drive channel. You have the typical EQ, and you also have a tone, which is basically a presence effect, and you have a bright switch. But if you want to add delay, or you want compression, or you want chorus, or any other fancy stuff, you're going to need something external. So you can, of course, use a pedal board, or you can just use your Pod Go. So let's see how that works. Before you can set up the Pod Go to use the 4-cable method, it's pretty obvious that you actually need to have 4 cables. So where do those 4 cables go? This cable that I have in my hand, the blue one, is the input to the Pod Go. So when you're in 4-cable method, your guitar does not feed directly into the amplifier. It feeds into the Pod Go or the Helix or whatever HX effects or whatever device you're using in the 4-cable method. It goes into that device. So here we have the guitar in, and there's my blue cable. You can see, ignore the expensive German technology laying on the floor, that blue cable is connected to my switch, and that switch is connected through that fancy yellow cable to my guitar. So that is how the input gets into the Pod Go. The next cable you have to worry about with the 4-cable method is the FX send from the Pod Go, or whatever device you're using. And you can see I already have it plugged in with that red tipped cable. And let's see, where does it go next? The other end of that red tipped cable that's coming from the FX send goes to the input of your amplifier, as you can see here. Now that you have a signal coming in to your amplifier, you need to use the amplifier's FX loop to get it back out again. That's fundamental to the 4-cable method. So you can see down here, this is the FX loop of this Laney. And so I take a blue cable, or a blue tipped cable, and I plug it into the FX send. That's the next step. And that blue tip cable, which came from the FX send of your amplifier, goes into the FX return of the Pod Go. So now you have 2 FX loops connected to each other between the 2 devices. So far we have 3 cables connected for our 4-cable method. We have the guitar input, we have the FX send, we have the FX return. There's 1 cable left because 4 minus 3 equals 1. Where does that cable go? It goes in here to the main out, and use the left mono for the purpose of 4cm. If you're doing 2 amps and you want to run in stereo, you can use both of them. But for this purpose, we just use the left mono. And in a moment, we'll see where does the other end go. So we have 4 cables connected to the Pod Go already, but we only have 3 connected to the amp. Where does that 4th cable go, you may ask? Well, the main output of the Pod Go goes here to the FX return of the amplifier. And now we are completely cabled for 4cm. Now we can focus on building our preset. And by the way, once you have this set up, you never have to change it, because I'll show you how flexible it is. You can just leave it there, basically no matter what you want to do. So now it's time to build a 4cm preset. And here, this is a stock vanilla preset as you get when you open new preset on the Pod Go. All of the blocks are in exactly the position that they would be. You can move things around however you want to, but there are a couple of key components here. One of them is obviously the FX loop. So let's take a look at that. Let's change the view. I think this is called Edit View. And we want to scroll over. And we want to turn on that FX loop. What happens now? What happens now is that if I start using my amplifier, I will hear the preamp section of my amplifier. That's good. But what's not so good is I will also hear that amp block. Let's take a look. That is an amp block, and that is a cab block here. I don't want them when I'm in 4cm because I don't want to hear the amplifier of the Pod Go playing through the preamp of my tube amp. That won't sound very good. And under no circumstances do I want to hear that cab, because as you can see, I already have a cab. So I don't need a cab block ever when I'm in 4cm. So let's go to the cab block and turn it off. Cab block, gone forever. Now, when I'm in 4cm, does that mean I never want to use an amp? Well, yes and no. First of all, this gives you a couple of different options. If you want to use that amp block, first of all, I recommend that you don't use an amp block, but you use a preamp block. Okay? Because you're feeding that preamp into a tube power amp, and it sounds cleaner and, to my ears, better if you just use a preamp block. I'm going to choose one of my very favorites preamps in the Pod Go, which I learned to love in my Helix days, which was this here Line6 litigator. So now I have a Line6 litigator in my signal chain, which is great. But as I just said before, I don't want any amp or preamp model playing into my tube amplifier or into the preamp section. And the way it's set up now, if you look at that FX loop and you remember how we cabled it, when it goes out, it goes to the input of my amplifier. And when it comes back, it's coming back from the FX send of my amplifier into the FX return of my Pod Go, which means the preamp section of that Laney amplifier will be feeding into this preamp that I have here, the litigator. and I don't want that. So what does that mean? Here's what it means. It means that the use of the FX loop and the use of the preamp block are mutually exclusive. You do one or the other, but not both at the same time. So that's a very simple concept. Right now, you can see that the FX loop is active and the litigator is bypassed. That means that I will be hearing the preamp of the Laney and I won't be hearing the litigator. And that's what I want in this situation. But what if I do want to hear the litigator? What do I need to do? If I want to use the litigator, and it makes sense that I want to use it since I put it in there. Here, let's do this. There you can see my preamp litigator. What do you see has changed? What has changed is that I switched off the FX loop. So as I said before, they're mutually exclusive. One or the other, but not both. Now you can see that the mono FX loop has already been assigned to this foot switch by default, which is good because that means that by pressing this foot switch, I can turn it on and off. That's a great start, okay? So now let's imagine that I want to assign a foot switch to the preamp so I can also turn the preamp on and off. But guess what? The preamp has to be off when the FX loop is on, and the FX loop has to be off when the preamp is on. So how about if I assign both of them to toggle on the same foot switch? How do I do that? So here's how you do it. You move over to the block that you want to assign to that foot switch. It's this foot switch right here that the FX loop is assigned to, and you press it down and hold it. And then you get a question. Well, you have to press it down and hold it, and then you have to respond. And then you press OK. And now watch what happens. So here's where the magic happens. If I press that foot switch, you will see that I'm toggling back and forth. Now my line 6 litigator is on and my FX loop is off. Now my FX loop is on and my litigator is off. So that's a beautiful way to do this and just be able to switch back and forth. So within the same preset, you can use a snapshot or you can just use a foot switch like this. You can switch back and forth, and sometimes, so here I'd be using the preamp of my Laney, and here I'm using the litigator or whatever else, what other preamp I want to use. So that's how it works. Just make sure this guy right here is always turned off, and I'm going to save it to make sure. So I hope this is helpful. I hope you can experiment with it and play around with it. You can also assign other effects to that same foot switch, this one right here. So you can turn other things on and off at the same time you're toggling the amp or preamp block and the FX loop. And you can really get very creative with it. So I hope this video helped you, and good luck.